If you like the video, make sure to like, subscribe, and comment. For more videos like this, what paranormal experiences have you actually had that you cannot explain? 2 years ago, I woke up around 1 a.m. thinking, I can never go home again. It was the most intense sense of homesickness I've ever experienced, full of panic and regret. I tried to calm myself down. Logically, of course I could. My parents lived just a couple hours away, still in my childhood home. I'd fought hard to get away from the suburb I grew up in, so why this sudden intense longing? The next day, I got a call that my dad had been hospitalized during the night and was in the ICU. He didn't make it out. And while the house is still there, it's not home anymore. When I was in high school, the days before cell phones were common, my friends were to come over to pick me up from my house one night. We had made plans at school for them to pick me up at 7 p.m. At 6, my parents said I had to come with them to do something, and I totally forgot to call my friends and tell them. They came to my house at 7 p.m. and called the house phone. No one answered. There was 4 of them in the car. They all told us the exact same story. They said that they were about to pull out of my driveway, but they saw someone peek through the blinds from the bedroom on the top floor right. That was my room, so they assumed that I was fucking around. 5 more times, they said that someone would peek through the blinds, and a couple of them said they even saw the person's eyes. We got home at probably 7:10 to 7:15, and they were still in our driveway. One of my friends came over and said they thought I was messing with them. Then they asked me, "So, who's staying in your room?" I told them that no one. So they asked, "Who's home at your house right now?" Again, I told them, no one. Their stone-cold faces then told me what they had seen repeatedly over the last 15 minutes. At first, we all thought there was a burglar in the house or something, so we called the cops. They came over and inspected the house. There was 0 signs of break-in, nothing was touched and nothing was stolen. Our house had an alarm on it, so there is no way someone could have come into the house without setting off the alarm. My family, my friends, and the cop all kind of stood around for a few minutes, trying to make sense of the situation. My friends swore up and down, and still do, that they couldn't have imagined what they saw. All 4 of them saw the same things, and it wasn't particularly a dark night, so their eyes wouldn't be playing tricks on them. To this day, none of us can make sense of the situation. A few weeks ago, I was sitting at my desk in my university room. We think our flat's haunted because weird stuff happens every so often, things disappear, there's noises when nobody's in, stuff like that. Suddenly, I get a sharp pain in my leg, as if I'd been stabbed. I look down and there's nothing there, and absolutely nothing that could have caused it, so I carry on with my work. Next time I look down, there's a trail of blood going from just above my ankle and trickling down my foot. No explanation. I cleaned off the blood and bandaged it up, and it's healing now, but I still have no idea how I got the wound. It literally sprung from nowhere. Camping in the desert in Utah. I was a wilderness guide and lived out of my truck, so camped nearly every night, so totally used to weird noises, twigs cracking, whatever. But one night it was extremely calm and quiet, just a weird vibe in the air. A couple friends and I were on BLM land in Utah near Moab, and we had just put out the fire and laid our bags out. Just as I was starting to fade out, something grabbed me by my wrists and jerked my arms straight up into the air. I sat up immediately and 2 of my friends bolted up at the same time. We all had it happen to us, and we couldn't explain it. Nothing else happened, but still makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up when I think about it. A few years ago, my sister was married to a soldier in the British Army and he was stationed in Germany. We all visited her and she knew I was interested in history, so for a day out, we visited Belsen-Bergen, the former Nazi concentration camp. As we were walking around, my sister was pushing the pram with my nephew in it. He was 1 or 2 years old at the time. The thing about Belsen-Bergen is that after the way, it was burnt to the ground, so it's more or less blank fields. As we walked, we passed a tree when my nephew asked my sister who the kids were behind us. We all turned around and no one was there. My sister asked which kids, and he replied the ones in the pajamas. Yet again, no kids anywhere to seen. We all knew for a fact that he has no idea what country he was in, yet alone know about the horrible events which occurred at that camp. My family and I had just rented this beautiful historical house that was built around the Underground Railroad era. It had small hideouts and doors where slaves would hide out in. As soon as we moved it, we got uncomfortable vibes from it. We'd hear footsteps coming from the upstairs when everyone was downstairs, the TV would turn off/on by itself and doors would open and close by themselves. We eventually accepted the fact that we had a ghost and it seemed harmless, So we called her Claudia. Each of my family members had at least seen Claudia once. She was a tall dark figure who would move fast. Most of the hauntings would come from my bedroom. It was always cold and had an unpleasant smell. My little brother began sleepwalking and would have terrible nightmares. One night became the final straw for my family and our relationship with Claudia. My sister and I were away at our friends while my parents and brothers were at home. The whole house was asleep when my dad woke up from screaming coming from my bedroom. When he ran out past the living room, where my little brother liked to sleep because of his sleepwalking, he noticed that my brother wasn't there. So he ran upstairs where he met my older brother who had heard the screaming as well, and they both saw that my bedroom door was shut and they realized that it was my little brother screaming in my room. They both went to open the door, but it was like something was blocking it. So finally my dad busted door down, and as the door flew open, a black shadow ran right past him and my brother. He then entered my room that was so cold that he could see his own breath. He looked over at my little brother, who was laying on my bed and covered in sweat and tears, and started yelling his name to wake him up. But my little just pointed, still asleep, at the corner of the room and started yelling, "Get her, Daddy, get her." My dad looked over but saw nothing but pitch black. That was enough for him. He quickly grabbed my brother, who was as stiff as a board, and ran the hell out of there. When my brother woke up the next day, he had no memory of what had happened that night and still doesn't remember when he talked about it almost 5 years later. We moved out of that house a few weeks after the incident, and my brother stopped sleepwalking as soon as we did. We've heard a few other stories from the people who currently own the house, but nothing quite as terrifying as what happened to my brother or my dad. The house has a great history behind it, but it was too creepy for my family. Few years ago now, I was driving home towards Chelmsford, England/Essex. Middle of winter, probably around midnight, my girlfriend is in the passenger seat. There is no moon and the road is unlit and empty, and I am enjoying the drive. I'm pretty much flat out on a long right-hander coming out of a roundabout when I notice there is a girl in the middle of the carriageway. She is tall, skinny and dressed head to toe in black with a long billowing skirt. She has long black hair and is facing away from me with her arms by her side. Like I said, I'm pretty much flat out, so it happens quickly. I swerve into the opposite lane, just missing her, and hit the brakes. In my rear view mirror she is momentarily lit up with my brake lights and is again facing away from me but still on the same spot and no sign of movement. I am spooked and instinctively get off the brakes and back on the gas. I can see her silhouette recede in the mirror. My girlfriend didn't see a thing but is startled awake when I swerve. I circle around the next roundabout to come back to prove I'm not crazy, but there is no sign of her. There is no path near that part of the road. It is on a slightly raised embankment through farmland. No reason for anybody to be there, especially at that time of night, and nowhere to hide when I came back around. I'm not religious or superstitious in the slightest, and I think it's pretty easy to explain away, probably just a drunk girl or something, but it just didn't feel right. It creeped me out enough to consider it a potential paranormal experience. I had a pretty vivid night terror about the same girl sometime later. I woke up and she was tapping on the window, ground floor flat, then she was in the room but had no face. Weird. When I was 15, my family went for a trip to a hill station named Shimla in India. We booked suite in a hotel in which the master bedroom had a glass platform of size 8 by 8 feet sticking about 2 feet outside the room over the valleys which were hundreds of feet below us. Being an adventurous kid, I decided to sleep on that platform overlooking the hills and valleys while my dad slept on bed and mother's sister in other bedroom. So, at around 1:30 at night I was sleeping on my side facing the glass which was about 3 inches from my face. Suddenly my eyes opened and I saw a woman looking at me intently from outside the glass. I still remember clearly her face was totally pale and eyes dark with black hair and some dark cloth on the body. I could only explain her gaze as of a lion before he jumps in to kill his prey. It took me 3 to 4 seconds to realize where I am and that this is not some human looking through a window but some entity floating outside my room. I shouted as loud as I could and pushed myself back so hard from the glass that I ended up hitting the other end of room by force. My dad woke up and turned all lights on, but there was no one to be seen now. That was the last time I ever slept with my window shades open in life. It's been 8 years since the incident, but those eyes terrify me to this day. When I was 16, I would jump on my trampoline out back for hours every night. Literally, hours. I would listen to my iPod and just daydream to get away from a rough family life. One night when I was jumping, a kid ran past our fence full speed carrying a box about the size and shape of a skateboard. He ran to the park behind my house and held it by the edge, then tossed it into the air so that it flipped a few times before landing on the ground. At this point I was a little weirded out because he was just standing over it staring for a pretty long time. Then out of nowhere he just bolts full speed back past our fence like he didn't even notice I was there. Alright, that's a bit weird. I just kept jumping and staring at where the box was. Here's where it gets creepy. The box looked like it was moving. Then something started to rise out of it. I actually stopped jumping and rubbed my eyes and watched as what looked like a full-grown man rose out of a box that was like 2 inches thick. He had an elongated head with no hair. His skin was orange, and his eyes were huge and pitch black. He raised one arm up to his side and the box just kind of went into what I can only describe as a trench coat. He walked over to the only pavilion we have at the small park, grabbed the metal beam holding up the overhang and started to bang his head hard onto the beam over and over. At this point I had rubbed my eyes quite a few times and couldn't even move. I had no idea what I was seeing. Then without warning he just stopped and his head quickly whipped around and stared right at me. It was like he could feel me watching him. A giant, and I mean giant smile came across his face as those dark eyes just stared at me. He tilted his head back and forth a few times. I had goosebumps and my eyes stared to tear up. Even typing this is making my hair stand on edge because I won't ever forget that look. As I was about to start crying, and I don't know why I wanted to cry but his face just filled me with terror, he turned around and kind of phased down the road off into the distance. Phase like those units the Protos have in StarCraft that leave a trail of themselves for a short period of time if that helps to explain it. He was gone. That was it. I bawled my eyes out and sprinted inside and called my best friend who assured me I was seeing things and needed to calm down. I'm sure I sound insane and no one will believe me, but this is the creepiest thing that has happened to me. I know what I saw and to this day when I think about it my eyes begin to water and my hair stands on edge. My grandma's house is chock full of weird stories, going way back. Pretty much everything weird and scary has happened in the hallway leading to the spare bedroom. My grandma would see my grandpa's silhouette walking down the hall. He'd stop at the door to their bedroom and peer in, and she'd ask if he needed something. He wouldn't answer and would keep walking. Peeved, she would get up to go ask him again, only to find him in the living room sleeping, or watching TV and insisting he'd been there the whole time. My mom has heard someone calling her name from the same hall, and once we were there alone house sitting while my grandparents were out of town. They were due back late that night, and my mom and I both heard heavy footsteps coming from the hall. She told me they must have come home early, so she went to greet them. No one there. Guest room at the end of the same hall has a TV that will turn on by itself. They also had a couple stay there, and neither one was particularly superstitious. The next morning the husband was unusually quiet. He finally got a chance to talk to my grandma alone and said very simply someone was watching us last night. He had seen a figure standing in the corner of the room staring at them, and had been so frightened that he just closed his eyes and tried to go back to sleep. When my grandma pressed for details, he kind of shrugged it off and didn't want to talk about it anymore. There's also a middle bedroom between the spare room and my grandparents' room, which we have always just called Tipsy_Danger's room because I used to stay with them so often. I was on my bed once when I heard a thump and then a skittering noise, like something had jumped off the bed and was running across the floor. I thought it was the cat being weird, so I sat up to see what she was doing, only to find that the cat was at the foot of the bed staring intently at the doorway to the hall. I looked around for a bit but was unable to find anything. Several years ago when I was in my mid-20s I accepted a job as visitor services manager at a medium-sized historic house museum. The house was a Victorian Gothic cottage of an author who wrote a single rather important book and then rode that fame for many more less successful and equally poor written publications on various topics. Anyway, the house was beautiful but dark and oppressive in that perfectly creepy manner that only Victorian homes can be. It sat near the street with 2 other buildings, a carriage house and another mansion behind, all belonged to my non-profit employer. My office was tucked in the front corner of the ground floor of the carriage house. In the daytime it was filled with sunlight and faced the perfectly manicured cottage gardens. But at night it was dark and gloomy and the position of the desk put my back towards the expanse of the quiet empty 100-some-year-old building. It was eerie on the best of days and terrifying on several of the worst, and this dreary March day happened to be the very worst. It had been an exceptionally boring day, as most were, working at an ill-attended museum. All told, I think we'd sent a total of 1 tour with 1 visitor and their disinterested college student tour guide through the house. I'd spent most of the day staring longingly at Googled pictures of Robert Pattinson on the computer behind the front desk. As I said, this was a while ago, my tastes have improved. It was before the clocks spring forward for the season, so it was nearing dark before closing and the deep cloud cover and persistent drizzle didn't improve the ambient lighting. Seated at the front desk in the poorly stocked gift shop, I sent my 2 remaining tour guides in to close the house for the night, which involved switching off lights, switching others on, shutting some doors, and opening yet others, Apparently all to ensure the house burned in a particular manner or that a blaze took it in the night. Or to set up some specifically encouraged path for robbers who managed to ninja sneak past the security system to steal tired velvet upholstered settees and ugly faded lithographs. So the 2 tour guides were in the house and I was stationed at the front desk, on the main floor of the 1872 carriage house. Directly above me was a lofty attic space used as merchandise and junk storage of the type only museums seem to accumulate, because everyone should save the posters from the 1994 mother-daughter tea fundraiser, just in case. Above me and to the right was the guide break room complete with crappy folding table and chairs, microwave and multiple boxes and crates of books, educational material, and related. Downstairs in the gift shop, on my desk was an old handset landline phone that could dial out but could also, with the press of an aptly labeled guide room button, reach the room above on speakerphone, so that I might call up and announce a pending tour, or yell at them, or sing, though I don't think I ever did sing to the guides up there. I was just finishing up considering what color Robert Pattinson's I might be in candlelight when I started to hear the most considerable racket coming from the guide break room. It sounded very much like a person of considerable girth lifting heavy objects, carrying them to the other side of the room, and then unceremoniously dumping them out, stomping the entire time. This continued for perhaps 30 seconds, and I recall the thought that drifted up through my confusion and irritation was that sounds urgent, as if the person was doing whatever it was they were doing as fast as possible. Anyway, I was pissed, and no one should have been up there. I called up, on speakerphone, and said something like, "What the hell are you doing?" And no one answered, so I went with the classic fallback of hello? 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 And then my voice died in my throat as I listened. I could hear him slash her slash it moving clearly through the speakerphone, picking things up, shoving things, dropping things, then I heard it come up to the desk where the phone sat. I could hear it breathing hard and moving things on the desk, papers, maybe even the phone base. It was at that moment that I realized that not only had I seen both my tour guides leave to close the adjacent house, confirming that I was indeed alone in the building, but that I could see all unlocked doors from my seat, and no one had come in since their departure. The hair stood up on my arms and I immediately radioed our aged but well-meaning security guard, who happened to be standing just outside the front door of the carriage house in the misty yuckness of the evening. God knows why he wasn't inside where it was much warmer. He went straight up the stairs upon my call. I watched him march up the first set of stairs and then listened as he turned at the landing and walked up the last handful tentatively. I held my breath waiting for him to open the door and then heard no more sounds. "Rod? What's up there?" "Rod WHO's up there?" But there was no one. He came back down the stairs looking at me a bit owlishly, as I had insisted there was someone up there. The room had been empty and nothing had been touched, save a pile of freshly crumpled paper in the center of the table. At this point my guides, having heard the ruckus on the radio, returned from closing the house. They swore up and down that when they left nothing had been amiss, that they had not crumpled the paper. There had been a stack of neat new paper on the center of the table when they'd gone to close up. I won't lie. I was shaken by it. I grew up in old houses and have worked in the historical field my entire adult life, so I've encountered a few odd and inexplicable things over the years. But this was much scarier. After we'd finished closing up the visitor center for the day, I knew I would be returning to an empty house, and that thought was too much to bear. I instead sat in the parking lot of the local grocery store until my husband finished work. I have no idea what I heard up in that room, who walked up to the phone and was so frantically moving unseen objects, but I know with absolute certainty that it was not good and that was angry. The oral history that had passed down from guide to guide for generations of museum employees spoke of a young man, a stable hand, who had hanged himself in the building at the end of 19th century. But most museums have a story like that, and it's likely not true. Whatever this was, I sincerely hope I don't meet it again. When I was about 18, I worked at my uncle's gas station. Fridays I would do the overnight shift. Now this story I call 22. In few minutes you'll find out why. The story starts off with me, by myself in the gas station. It's middle of the winter and it's about 2 o'clock in the morning. Winter season is extremely slow. I haven't had one customer in over an hour. I start to clean the store and make some coffee when a customer stops at the pumps. The guy gets out. It's a short Italian guy wearing one of those Puma track suits with a wife beater under it and sporting some bling around his neck. He was driving an old dirty little car. I have no idea what kind it was. I say to the man, "How's it going? What can I get you?" This is an NJ, so I have to pump the gas. The guy reaches to his back right pocket and pulls out a money clip with all $20 bills in it. He looks at the price, then down at his money and begins to count. I say again to the man, "What's it gonna be?" Again he looks at the price, then down at his money and finally says, I'll have $22 of the regular. While I was putting the nozzle into his car, I thought to myself, that's weird. $22? He clearly had plenty of money to make it even, but in the end, why should I care? So as the car was getting its $22 worth of gas, I followed the man into the store. I stop at the doorway just to keep an eye on him. He goes directly to the cold drinks. Stops and stares at the first cooler door in front of him. Then he looks to his right, then looks to his left. He then turns around and walks out to his car. I was like, okay. Weird. By now the gas is done. I walk up to him in his car and the man asks, how much do I owe you? I look at him with a confused face and say, 22, man. He says okay and gives me two $20 bills. I give him his change, then he goes on his way. Not even 2 minutes go by and I get another customer. It's an Indian guy driving a really nice SUV Porsche and he's wearing some really nice clothing. I meet him in his car at one of the pumps. As he's getting out, I greet him and ask what he wants. Now in this moment, I had that sense of deja vu come over me because he started doing everything exactly the same as the Italian guy did. When I asked what he wanted, he simply reaches to his back right pocket and pulls out a money clip with all $20 bills. He looks at the price, then down at his money. I asked again, but I already knew the answer. He looks at the price, then his money again, and says, I'll have $22 of the regular. Now at this point I'm kind of freaking out. It felt like an episode from the Twilight Zone. The guy walks in the store. Goes directly to the cold drinks. Does the same shit as the Italian guy. Looks right, looks left, then turns around and walks to his car. I'm thinking to myself, is this really happening? By now the gas is done. I rack up the nozzle and the Indian guy asks, how much do I owe you? I say with a gasp, 22. When I was 15, I was washing floor at my parents' house, painted hardwood. I was home alone. When I walked away to change water, I came back to see child's barefoot wet prints coming out of the kitchen and going into a living room. I'm Russian, and, as folklore claims, every house has a living creature in it, domovoi. He is small, like a 4 to 5 year old child, and either can bring luck and happiness to the house, or make everybody's life miserable. In our case, I believe, it was a mean creature. We always lost things. No cat would live in our house for longer than a few months, just generally not happy house. I didn't like, before or after encounter, being in the house anyway. Presently, my husband and I live in a rental house. We have a wall clock that has stopped. We never bothered to change the batteries in it. We left it on 420, just for a heck of it. One day we went for a hike with our friend, and then invited him for a drink. As we sat down to relax, I looked at the clock, and the time has changed precisely for 1 hour. It was 5:20. So, I pointed out to my husband, the old batteries kicked in, and he goes to check his theory. There were no batteries in the clock. We all laughed it off, changed time to our favorite, and kind of forgot. Never happened before or after. A few months later, same house. We have floor scale, that's always stays under TV stand. I see them moved, to the entrance, by the door. So, I asked my husband, if he moved it. He didn't. I didn't touch it either. Same apartment. We got a cat. Cat jumps on the wall, same location, several occasions, like someone pulling a string up. She gets startled on her own just in that spot. I have checked wall and surroundings from her point of view, I see nothing. She still does it, and we have her for 2 years. Recently, we moved the couch, so now I always can see that spot. A few days ago I saw a white shadow? Smoke? Really can tell. It was under the ceiling, right above the cat spot. I'm pregnant, so we don't smoke anymore. That would be the only explanation for me. Now, this spirit, not scary at all. I'm not afraid to be alone now. Although, I have 2 dogs and 2 cats, so it really is not spooky. Recently, I was working at the restaurant that was reconstructed from the old family house. When I started working there, new security guy started as well. He didn't last 2 weeks due to the paranormal activity in the house. People who worked there for years have a few stories to tell. So, as Ghost was acting up on my shift, I dared him to show himself. That was a mistake. First, he dropped 2 heavy pots right in front of me. 3 people saw it. The pots were huge, and would do some damage if landed on my head. No one could explain how that happened. Same thing, but with basket of deep fryer, 2 of them stoked, happened in a month after first accident. The flew horizontally of the shelf, where they always sit on, with a speed, like they were shot out of the gun. If I have not hesitated for a second, I would have it in my back. There were a few people who got to see it. All of us were speechless. No one could find any explanation for this accident as well. Constant knocking on the roof, light go on at night, rocking chairs moving on the porch, lady looking through the windows, people have seen all kind of stuff there, the restaurant even has a logbook, where all spooky stuff is documented. That was a really weird energy for me in the house. I didn't like going inside, and definitely would not want to be there alone at night. I live near Great Smoky Mountains National Park, and every day off my husband and I go hiking. There is a lot of old cemeteries, barns and cabins, that have not been demolished, history for people to see. We took trail, that had Little Greenbrier School and Children's Cemetery to pass. Cemetery is right across from the school entrance. As we approached the school, I got my camera out. My husband went inside and was peeking out of the window, waiting on me to take the picture. Camera would not focus. After a long struggle, I took semi-focused picture. After that, I walked around the building, trying to take more pictures, still no focus. My husband tried to take a picture of me at front of the school with his cell phone, no focus. Like, 1 of 10 pictures was not so blurry. Then I went inside, and I could not take a step from the door. I physically couldn't bring myself to take a step. No big deal. I'm trying to take a shot, no focus. I work my camera, when I see movement at front of the class. No one. I back up, terrified, not the good energy. On the way back, it was getting dark, and I didn't dare to go between school and cemetery. We walked around, by back wall, where no windows, as fast as we could. Next day at work I told the story, and one of the locals, whose family comes from the Smokies, you can see the family name on the gravestones, told me the story of the school. Little boy was killed by his friends there, inside of school, his body is in the cemetery at front of the school. Locals go there on Halloween as a dare thing or just to get spooky. I did some online research after, and other people report malfunctioning cameras and phones. My mother told me, when I was a little girl, that we are family of witches. And that I will know later, what she means. I guess, my sensitivity is a part of it. Have a blessed day. I used to work night shift security on a college campus. 11 p.m. to 7 a.m., usually by myself. If I was lucky I'd have a work-study student officer with me until 2. The campus had been around in one form or another since the Revolutionary War. Started as a wood fort, then stone, then finally a concrete fortress with dozens of brick buildings until the end of World War II, when they decommissioned the fort and turned it into a college. There's one building on campus that used to be an officer's quarters, a really fancy, rather upscale 3-story house. The place has all the classic ghost stories, lady in white, shadows moving on their own, footsteps, etc. I never believed them. Until I experienced them. Temperature drop. My first experience in there I was still on second shift, during the day. It was maybe 4 p.m, I remember the sun was still out. It was also in the 80s outside. I was crossing the main lobby, a large room in front of the double staircase, when I realized something. It was suddenly way too quiet, like the air was heavy and pressing down on me. I stopped walking for some reason. Then it got cold. Really cold, it must have dropped about 20 degrees. Needless to say, I booked it before I heard or saw anything. The scream. Another experience with this place, screaming. I was escorting a couple of new officers to show them how to lock the building. We were standing in the lobby, everything seems to be focused there, talking to the last guy in the building. 4 of us, standing in a group, when all but one of us heard it. Shuffling. Like something being dragged in short spurts across the floor directly above us. Scrunch 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 ae. A woman screamed. But there was nobody up there. I wanted to check it out, but the female officer I was next to was too creeped out. The child laughing. It must have been a few months after the scream incident. I hadn't gone through there much since then. I was escorting another new guy, and had just finished telling him the story about the scream. We were standing next to the back door. Once again, this room was directly connected to the lobby, with a rather large arch connecting them instead of a door. As we started walking into the lobby, a familiar feeling crept over me. It was quiet. And heavy. That's when we heard it. I'm pretty sure I heard the pitter-patter of little footsteps, but we both heard it. A little girl. Giggling. On the floor above us. The building was empty and already locked up. We were doing second checks. There was no way somebody else was in there, the previous patrols would have found them. We looked at each other. Veiled. Booked it out the door. The woman in black heels. This one is the last thing I experienced in that building. In fact, it's the only thing I saw outright. I was working alone that night. There were still 2 staff members in the building, one in the basement, one at the front desk. As I was locking the doors, they were finishing their tasks and getting ready to leave. I double-checked the building, turned off some lights, and started crossing the lobby when I looked up the staircase. The staircase runs parallel to the lobby. It goes up half a floor to the landing, then the rest of the way in a switchback setup, like this, but with another set of stairs on the other side of the landing too. There was a woman up there on the second floor. All I could see was the bottom of a black skirt, her legs, and black heels. Walking from the right to left. She was wearing heels, but there was no sound. And even though she was walking at a regular pace, I blinked. And she was gone. Nobody believes me when I tell them my stories, and you don't have to either, but I will swear on my life that it happened. First time was a few years ago. I was spending summer break at my parents' house. It was a very warm summer night. I was laying in my bathtub reading a book. I had my window open which lead to the backyard, but it has a screen on it. So I am laying in my tub reading when I hear soft knocking on the window. I make nothing of it because I think it's a moth. Then it happened again a few minutes later. I peeked over my shower curtain but didn't see anything. Maybe another few minutes I hear a soft shuffle across my bathroom floor, and then scratching on my door. I freak out. I have no pets, everybody is sleeping, and sound is coming from the inside of my bathroom. My thoughts are rushing about what could it be. I'm thinking a rat got into the room through the toilet, but I didn't hear a splash. I still think it's some animal anyway, so I am trying to figure out what can it be and what should I do if I open my curtain and it decides to jump at me. After 5 minutes I decided to open the curtain. And nothing is there. There is no way it could have gotten in or out. My window has a screen. There is maybe 1/4 of an inch space between the door and the floor. My bathroom vent is done in the way that nothing can go through it. I examined it early in the morning and there were no scratches. Still to this day I have no idea what it was. Another time was more like a dream. I just started practicing mediation and I started having weird dreams. One day I wake up but I know I'm sleeping. I can see my room and I know it's very early in the morning but my eyes are closed. And then I start feeling like something or somebody is probing my consciousness. Have you ever listened to music through good headphones and it sounds like the music is in your brain? It felt like that, except it was probing and trying to take over. Again I freak out because I don't even know what's going on, and then I wake up for real and the feeling goes away after a minute, but at the same time I am super scared because I have never felt anything like this before. At least when somebody is trying to restrain you physically you can do something. Mentally there is nothing you can do. I couldn't sleep really well for a few weeks. It happened again a couple of weeks later, but instead of it being super obvious the first time, it was a very gentle probing. I stopped meditation shortly after. I have never had it happen again since then. Call me insane, but I want to think I have managed to get omnipotence. Of course, I know that I do not have any of the sort. Let me tell the story. It was a dark night. The kind where you lay in bed and have yourself a nice set of dark thoughts and life reflections. I wasn't any different. After a few thoughts, I lull myself to a deep sleep. It is a rare occasion that I dream, but when such an event happens, I remember the dream with such detail that I often get things switched with real-life memories. Tonight was an exception. The dream starts with what I'd call the perfect girl. It's almost a still scene, she is sleeping, and the only thing is her. As I float away, the scene switches to my high school life. This dream occurred during those years, so I am used to it. I go about my normal day in the dream, but every once in a while, the perfect girl appears as a normal student. She is often doing generic student things, but her beauty make it impossible to overlook. Every time I see her at school, her outfit changes, hairstyle, etc. In the dream I decide to devote my time to getting this perfect girl. Days pass and the girl I'm after is somehow getting away from my very attempt at what is pure love to be shared with her. After 5 or so days, she acknowledged me and says something that is still fuzzy in my mind. Her first words to me were, "Well, you could have." At the moment I heard the last few words, my mind felt an instant rush of what I could only describe as power. Everything I have ever known in life fit together, like the final sprocket in a car. I derived theories that stretched the very fabric of space and time to near breakpoint on the human scale. I not only did theories, I did social items, too. I could get everyone to like me, at any time. Here's where the spooky part comes in. I wake up. Confused and groggy, I realize it was a dream. However, I remember what the girl said. Quickly I go downstairs to look for a pen and paper. But before I get to it, something rages in me like a narcolepsy of sort. I fall asleep, pen in hand, back on ceramic tile floor. When I wake up, the concept was gone. My mind felt as if it had a significant chunk stolen by the cruel world. I haven't had the dream since. I've been seeking what the last sentence for almost a year now. Thinking about the girl asleep dawns my soul. I long for her. I long for knowledge. I long for eternal sleep. I swear that this is all true and happened to me. If I ever see the girl again, I'll be sure to ask again. I met this girl on an online dating site. Christina. We started talking on the web and eventually I called her on the phone. We talked a few times and eventually decided to meet up. She was quiet on the phone, but she had a kid, so I figured she was being quiet so as not to wake him up. So the night before we are to meet up the next day, I have two really vivid dreams, almost lucid you could say. In the first dream, I am driving along the road that I would have taken to meet and I end up in an accident. I woke up for a minute, like anyone would I guess, shook it off and went back to sleep. The next dream was far, far stranger. I was at my mom's house. I was in the basement looking for something. I then hear this noise like someone banging on the floor. I was the weirdest noise though. I go back towards the door at the top of the stairs and I see my late father standing there. He had a cane in his hand and was standing there banging it on the floor. He was the one making the noise. His eyes though, they were the strangest shade of red I have ever seen. He kept banging on the floor and looking at me. I said, "What's wrong, Daddy?" He opened his mouth to speak and says no in the most bone-chilling tone you can imagine. I wake up. I am freaking out now. I can't go back to sleep and it's close enough to morning to even try, so I get up. I spend all morning thinking about the dreams and what they meant. So I finally decide maybe I shouldn't meet up with this girl. I decide to call her and tell her I can't make it. I dial her number and a man answers the phone. Me, is Christina there? Man, no, who is this? Me, this is Rob 42164. We were supposed to meet up today. Man, well, I am her husband, and I don't think that's going to happen. Me, I think I have the wrong number. So I hang up the phone. Now I am freaking out, a little pissed off, and scared all at once. About an hour goes by and she calls me and is yelling at me. Telling me I ruined everything. I told her to basically fuck off. I don't need the drama of messing around with a married woman. I tell her not to call me or contact me again. It's been 10 plus years since those dreams and I can remember every detail like it just happened. Maybe it was my own intuition. I don't honestly know.